المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خذنا على درب الأمل زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خذنا على درب الأمل.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Shakira Akabo and you are watching Schools Out. Providing our children with a good education is essential in ensuring them a bright future. What do we choose between public or private schools? In exploring this issue today, we have our first guest, Professor Ruxana Osman, who is the Dean of Humanities at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, Prof.
Thank you for having me.
Public and private schools is a big issue for most parents. Is private necessarily better than public?
I mean, I think it's good that you ask this pointed question, is it better than, and I'd have to say categorically, no, not necessarily. It depends on a variety of factors, and I think choices that parents make have to be informed by these factors. So most people imagine that private is good, public is bad. You just have to look at the matric results to see how many good public schools are producing results that are similar to private schools. But results are just one indicator of differences between schools. There are many other factors that one would need to take into account.
And you mentioned the matric results. Obviously at a public school you would pay a fraction of the cost that you would at a private school.
I mean, I think that's a very important point to make. I recently wrote a public piece just comparing some of the costs associated with private school and public school, and you'll find that exactly right. The cost is a fraction of what you would pay at the private school, and yet the results in key subjects like mathematics, science and social sciences are almost equivalent. Of course, one needs to be mindful of the fact that the public school sector is a huge, complex sector. So these kinds of results are not in all of the schools in the public school sector. They're in pockets within the public school sector. The point I'm making is that there are opportunities for good schooling in the public school sector, and I think we have a role to play in defending good quality public schooling, because after all, the poorest of the poor only have access to public school. So if we abandon public schools, it means we're abandoning the poorest of the poor in the public school sector.
And you mentioned there are a few factors, or rather various factors that make public schools better than private schools. Can you give us a few of those factors?
So I think most parents, when they're making choices, they usually, one of the key variables or key factor is the quality of education. So the perception is that public schools, the quality in public schools is poor and the quality in private schools is better. Quality of schooling is very important, but there are 5 factors, or at least 4 factors, that one would need to look out for. I just want to make one other point around the distinction between private and public, and that is most people assume that when one speaks about public schools, you're speaking about the high, the really expensive public schools. But we know that even in the even in the private school sector, there are categories of private schools. So there are low fee private schools, there are medium fee private schools, and so on. And so one should not make the mistake of assuming all public schools are the same and all private schools are the same. Having said that, the question of quality is very important, but how do you establish quality? And most of the research that my colleagues have done and that I've done point to about 4 factors. One of it is the leadership in the school, and here the school principal matters. The school principal's understanding of education, educational development, education change, educational innovation. It matters. What also matters is the school principal's understanding of learning outcomes, understanding the data that is produced by school results and how to use that data to improve learning for the next year or for the next block or for the next quarter. So you can see that the school principal is not just a manager, but needs to be a leader and also very well versed in issues pertaining to education. So that's one of the variables you would look out for when you're making school choices. Another variable is the level of qualification of the teachers. Are teachers teaching the subjects in which they are qualified to teach? What is their level of qualification? and so on. Now, the qualification question is not just a paper exercise. It's about what teachers know about their own subject matter. And most of the time when you see schools are underperforming, it's because teachers' own understanding of their knowledge of their subject matter is not as strong as it should be to enable students to learn. And here I refer specifically to subjects like mathematics, reading, literacy, numeracy, and so on. So the second one is the teacher's qualification, but coupled with that is the teacher's own understanding and competence in that subject. The third one is the kind of support that schools get from the communities and the family and the community in which they're located. Many of us assume that when we're paying good money for our education, everything happens in the school. You'll know that school is just one area in which children interact. The others are community, sports field, social media, and so on. So the role of the community and the role of family in partnering with the school, whether it's a private school or a public school, is absolutely vital. And then the fourth variable that's also very important is the student's own commitment to learning. We tend to think that it's all of these external factors that make good quality, but actually the commitment of the student to learning is quite important. So if you bring those factors together, the school leadership, the teacher's qualification and their competence, the involvement of the community and the family, and then the student's commitment to his own or her own learning, all come together in providing good quality education, irrespective of where it happens, in the public school or in a private school.
Okay, that's actually a very good point. However, parents today seem to think that their criteria for quality education is the learner to teacher ratio. And that's commonly asked when parents look for schools. How many learners are there to a single teacher? Can your comment on that?
I mean, I think it's an interesting student-teacher ratios. I myself have edited a book on large class teaching. Okay. And you know, university classes are huge. Yes. We have 1,000 students, 800 students. Yes. And the point to be made there is not, size may be important, but it's what happens in that interaction, what happens in the classroom, the quality of the interaction, etc. Now, I'm mindful of the fact that it can be pretty hard to teach a class of 50 or 40 with students who are at different levels of development, with students who are different age. I mean, we have many schools in the public school sector where there are multi-age students. Yes. I can understand that. But I don't think size in and of itself is the problem. So if I'm a parent, if I'm asking the question about size or teacher-pupil ratio, I'll be asking, I'd much rather ask what's the performance of that subject or students in a particular subject, and then bring the teacher-pupil ratio into account. And it's not, my point I'm making is, it's not an indicator in and of itself.
So it's far more than just
There's far more. It's actually what happens in the context of learning, what happens in the classroom.
Right. You mentioned public schools. Obviously, you get different types of public schools as you get different types of private schools. And good public schools differ from suburb to area to location where you are in Gauteng or wherever in South Africa you may be. How can we ensure that we find good public schools?
So, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I think how you find it is you obviously track the kinds of indicators I've given to you, those 4 key indicators, but word of mouth also matters in hearing what other parents think. Do the parents who think, whose opinions you are taking into account, do they share the values that you share about what education is about? So word of mouth is important. The actual performance of the school over a period of time. I tend to look at school leadership very seriously, and I take that very seriously. The kinds of innovations happening in the school, the autonomy that teachers have to exercise their teaching abilities and so on. So I think word of mouth I would trust quite a lot, but I would also take into account if I share similar values to the persons whose word of mouth I'm taking. So other factors would then be the performance of the school over a period of time.
Okay. And in terms of curriculum and assessments, if we had to look, they vary considerably in the public school space and in the private school space. Depending on which private school you send your child to, you could have alternative private schools, you could have, American schools, Cambridge schools. Does this then impact on the quality of the education at the end of the day when you're looking for university placements for your child?
So, I mean, university placements are open for to students who perform at a particular level. Okay, so access to education is anyone who's passed a good quality matric. Of course, once you get to university, it will depend on which program and course you want to enter. There are different requirements for engineering, for humanities, for the arts, for social science, for medicine, and so on. So I think it's not necessarily that the school has that impact, but it's the performance of the student in relation to the program he or she wants to get into. But different universities have different feeder schools as well, and that doesn't mean that the universities only take from particular schools. A lot depends on the performance of the students.
Okay. And my last question to you is regarding sport. It seems that in terms of sport, public schools seem to have an edge over private schools. Can you comment on that?
So, I mean, it's interesting that you say public schools have the edge over private schools. It would depend where that public school is, what's its background, its history, and so on. Because I've also seen public schools where sport is non-existent,
yes,
and then private schools that are really doing well in sport.
Right.
And again, one should not single out sport and so on. It's the holistic development of all students that we need to take into account.
Okay, all right. And thank you very much, Prof, for this interview this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, and that's it from Professor Ruxana Osman at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. Stay with us. We're going for a short ad break now. We'll be back.
زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة.
Welcome back to Schools Out. We are now chatting to Mr. Essex Clark, who is the principal of Northcliffe High in Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, Mr. Clark.
Thank you.
So, your school is a much sought after public school in your area. Can you tell us to what do you attribute the success?
I think it's a number of things. I think that we serve our community very well. Over the years, the school's approaching 50 years. And I think our community have grown to rely on us as a school that will obviously provide a very, very solid education for their children, give them opportunities in a variety of additional activities, and lead them towards success at tertiary level. And those are generally some of the things that we do here at the school.
And in what ways do you think public schools perhaps have an edge over private schools?
Look, I think that there's always the parent is discerning in terms of what they want for their child. And I think a lot of public schools offer perhaps sometimes a greater variety than a lot of the private schools do in terms of subject offerings and in terms of extramural offerings. And I think parents are a lot more discerning these days. They look very carefully at what high schools they will send their children to, and we get people questioning us when their children are very, very young about what we would be offering and whether that would be a suitable environment for their children. And I think that parents also look at value. They look at what will serve their budgets and where they are going to get the very, very best education for their children in terms of that approach.
Absolutely, it's all about the quality.
Yeah.
So tell us about your extramural offerings, because I think your school offers quite a bit.
Yeah, we do. I think typical of a school, a privileged school like ours, we have an incredible variety of extramural offerings. We try the very best we can to be the best we can in each and every activity. So we do, to a certain extent, encourage our children to be the best that they can. And we certainly make sure that they get the very best coaching, that they are goal-driven and that they're seen to make the very, very best effort that they can to achieve in their particular activities. We think it's a good thing. These children that go on to university, we have a very good reputation at universities around South Africa in terms of children who are incredibly successful in their fields. And I think part of that is being in an environment where we encourage success, where we make them work towards achieving their goals, their specific goals, and each of them have specific needs and goals in order to achieve something for themselves.
Okay. And your school is a co-ed school rather than a single-sex school. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think this is a perfect environment for adolescents, young people, in order to grow in a co-educational environment where they can learn a lot more about interacting with the opposite sex, about understanding each other, and I think the world needs a lot of that. All tertiary institutions are co-educational.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a crucial sort of stage of young people's lives, and they need that kind of interaction that's going to help them in their futures.
Yeah, and help them to develop the social skills to deal with
Absolutely.
each other. In what could you advise parents who are stuck in this conundrum of should we choose private over public or public over private?
I think in terms of their communities, if they find good schools, and really I am not going to discern between public and private. Find good schools that offer you good value.
Okay.
And then I would, if you can, get an idea of that school's track record at tertiary level, at university level.
Okay.
You know,
Is that
find out what
the litmus test,
how those
really?
kids do when they go to university, because you're going to have your private schools kids and your state school kids all competing in the same environment.
Absolutely.
So that is the acid test, is how they do at university level. And that is one of the things that we're very proud of, is the exceptional level of achievement that our children get at tertiary level, at the universities, the top universities in South Africa. And that's a great source of pride for us. No, we've noticed there's been a lot of interest among our parents in what's going on in the media in terms of initiation practices and how their children are introduced to high school. And one of the things we've done here is that we've put an end to any kind of initiation. Children that arrive here are made to feel at home. What we do is a blazer awarding ceremony where I congratulate each and every child for having completed their orientation, where they get to shine around the school and get an idea of what the school's about. There's certainly a lot of fun activities just to help them bond and socialize, and we make them feel that they have an ownership of the school, which I think is important for young people.
Definitely.
But we also see that as part of our success. These young people then work towards achieving their potential at an early stage. They don't feel that they have to earn their stripes in any way. They are here and they are part of our school.
That's a very comforting thought, especially from the parents' perspective.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Essex Clark, for chatting to us today.
Thank you so much.
And there you have it. You've got some information here from Mr. Essex Clark, who is a public school principal. And now we move on to speak to Mr. Dokrat, who is the head of AMS Schools. Stay with us. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show, Mr. Dokrat.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair for giving us the opportunity of highlighting Muslim schools in the country.
Parents today are faced with a vast array of choices when it comes to schools. Why should they choose Muslim schools?
Why should they not choose Muslim? That's the question. Let me put it this way. Muslim schools are essential. And I must give you a bit of history why they came about. We owe a debt to the Department of Indian Affairs. It's an irony, isn't it? If you remember the Jummah issue, when they said Muslims will no longer be allowed Jummah time off. And we said, wow, what are they doing to us? That was the impetus that galvanized us into action to start off Muslim schools. Now the question you asked me is, why do parents want Muslim schools? The answer is very simple. First of all, we give value. Muslim schools, and I must quote here to you, a saying by Ikram Nadwi. And this is what he says. Modern education seeks to incorporate people into the economy to earn a livelihood. Islamic education seeks to train to become good individuals in terms of Islamic values and earn a halal rizq. This is the concept for Muslim schools. Why Islamic schools? We have a number of A's. Not only the students get A's, we also get A's. The first of A's is akhlaq. Our schools are strong on akhlaq, strong on the development of integrity, honesty, and all the good qualities, too numerous to mention, which are part of the program as well. We have akhlaq combined with tahara, the purity of the soul, the purity of the body, the heart. Our schools have an Islamic ethos, right from the time the child comes till the time he goes home, and even thereafter in the afternoons. The ethos is there. The Islamic ethos is there. I call it SOS, salvation of the souls. That's what we're trying to do. We believe that Islamic schools are necessary because we need to control the curriculum. You know, there is evolution and all these things taking place. But if we can introduce our own curriculum, then we are concentrating on the values of Islam itself. On the pragmatic level, there is a return to Islamic literature. Poetry, Bashir, Zakaria Bashir, Iqbal, Rumi, and all these people, we introduce our child to them. So the child is now learning about Islam and the values of Islamic poetry. One of the problems other schools have is the number of children in the classroom. We, alhamdulillah, are able to limit them to 20, 21 or so on. So you have the benefit of individual and close tuition as well.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about, you mentioned akhlaq, and today do you honestly see our schools as being that beacon of akhlaq for our children?
Yes and no. It will depend upon the individual school, but generally speaking, most of our schools have a tremendous akhlaq because akhlaq pervades every aspect of the school life. From the time they come in the morning, as soon as they get out of the car, greeting the security chap, that's akhlaq. Entering the school building and saying the prayer when you enter the building. Everything else follows from there. And the akhlaq is of such a nature that we give awards to individual children for akhlaq, because that is essential. That is the highlight of all of our activities. So akhlaq, we have no problem with. There are areas where we lack, but that depends on individuals. We try and bring the akhlaq into the parents' akhlaq, into the parents' lives as well. Not only to the children, because if the parent doesn't have akhlaq, the child won't. But there's now overflows from the school to the parent, and the parents have now become conscious of akhlaq as well. So that is another blessing that emanates from there.
And what can you say about the common cry from parents that Muslim schools tend to be elitist? What can you tell us about that?
Are we? Are we elitist? Emphatic no. My answer is an emphatic no. You know, why is the same charge not leveled at other independent schools that they are elitist? I mean, there are other religious schools which can be termed elitist, first of all, because of the fee structure. Secondly, because of the admission structure. You know, you have to be a top parent and a well-earning parent to be able to ensure that your child goes to those schools. Sometimes you have to buy your way into their schools as well. We don't have that. The problem, I think, here is that because some of the schools are family-created, it creates the wrong impression. As an example, without mentioning names, Shawnee Muslim School or CIS, or whatever it is, because the schools are started by families, the families associated with it, the families happen to be wealthy, but they've plowed their money into the community without any returns on it. Right. So I think the image is falsely created that these are elite schools. You know, we cater for all Muslims, regardless of race. And we have some programs in place. We ensure that the children of Muezzin, as an example, are allowed entry, free entry into our schools. We make sure that immigrant children from all communities are allowed into our schools. And we also ensure that we search for talented children in the indigenous community and we sponsor them. So elitists, I would say no. And our fees, as I said earlier, lower. What is important here is this. Yes, we are guilty if you can accuse us of a narrow view of life. We are guilty if we are guilty of imbuing Islamic values into our schools. Yes, we are guilty of that. In that way, we are elitists, yes, because you must be a Muslim and you must be one who's geared up to learn about Islam and practice the deen itself. So that makes us elitists. If we are, Allah knows best.
Jazakallah so much for speaking to us today, Mr. Docrat. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah. And that concludes our show on the public versus private schools. We hope you found this show informative and useful. Join us again next week for another episode of Schools Out. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
زمر باص المدرسة صوت